Drinks, food, art, fun. This is Hops and Spirits Kentucky.
I feel like I'm saying this every single episode. Time is flying by. We're into a brand new month, brand new season, the holiday season. Lots of get-togethers, Friendsgiving, holiday parties. Hopefully are in store for you, and hopefully you're bringing some good Kentucky beer, bourbon, wine, just a good drink, good food from Kentucky to those events. Got another great episode for you this week. We talk with Ariel Jahn of Woodinville Whiskey out of Washington, but we're not technically going beyond Kentucky. She'll explain it all when we talk to her for our Q&A. But before that, let's get to some news and notes. The Kentucky Bourbon Trail Craft Tour, now celebrating its 10th anniversary, has added its 24th stop with the addition of Whiskey Thief Distilling in Franklin County. Whiskey Thief Distilling was founded in 2012 and has been operating more recently under the name of Three Boys Farm Distillery. The new owner, Walter Zausch, I hope I said that right, acquired the Franklin County site there on Crab Orchard Road 2 years ago and set his sights on joining the KBT Craft Tour. The distillery announced its name change earlier in October, and the farm, though, is still known as Three Boys Farm. Back in July, 1020 Craft Brewery announced it would be opening a third location in Louisville, this time in the former Douglas Levine Brothers coffee shop there in the Highlands region. The Highlands Tap Room location will have coffee service starting in November. And soon, Mazi Pie, artesian sourdough pizzas and baked goods handcrafted with house mill flour, same as its Butchertown spot, will offer food. You can check them also out in Butchertown and Anchorage too. So 3 locations now for 1020. And last but not least, here on our news and notes, Bourbon with Heart, a new nonprofit focusing on leveraging the popularity of bourbon to fund the arts, is seeking artists for its forthcoming Barrels of Heart exhibit at the Fraser History Museum, which will feature 20 painted bourbon barrels. The exhibit will open in early 2023 and be on display for 8 weeks. Go to bourbonwithheart.org/art. Let me try that again. Go to bourbonwithheart.org/artist-call for details. But up next is our Q&A with Ariel Jahn, Woodinville Whiskey's development manager, and she'll explain her connection to Kentucky. Enjoy.
Remember to check out Hops and Spirits on social media at Hops Spirits, all one word, on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also find Hops and Spirits on YouTube and at hopsspirits.com.
Joining us here for our Q&A on the Hops and Spirits Kentucky podcast, you might be going, well, wait a minute, didn't we just do a Beyond Kentucky? Yes, it's true, but it'll all make sense, and we're not exactly that far beyond Kentucky as we welcome in Woodinville Development Manager Ariel Jahn. Ariel, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we appreciate you joining us. And as folks go, wait, isn't Woodinville from Washington? You're not from Washington. You're a Kentucky girl, right?
Yes, I'm a born and raised Kentucky girl, so I like to say I'm the Kentucky part of the equation.
I like that. And I always ask this with any of the guests here on the show. I call it the Cliff Notes version because I know sometimes people can say a lot about themselves, but just the Cliff Notes version of a little bit about you. Maybe not too deep into what you do for Woodinville just yet, but just the Cliff Notes.
Perfect. Yeah. So I was born and raised in Kentucky, lived in almost every corner from Western Kentucky to a holler in Eastern Kentucky, and left after high school to go to school at George Mason University. Then I worked in restaurants and hotels in the DC metro area, met my husband, and we were like, we could live anywhere. So we took a 5-week road trip across the country, didn't know what we were going to do, ended up in Seattle, and that is where I found Woodinville for the first time.
But now you've always enjoyed a good bourbon, right?
I have always enjoyed a good bourbon. Every time I came back to visit family, the 10 years that I was gone, I would bootleg as much bourbon back as I could as well to wherever I was living.
Now, what pushed you to get into the bourbon business? Because it's one thing to enjoy, having a pour or something like that, but it's a whole different ball game to actually want to work in that world.
Definitely. I would say I kind of fell into it. I got my undergrad in tourism and events management. So I knew I loved food, beverage, hospitality, and traveling. I didn't quite know that you could work at a distillery. And so when I found the position in the tasting room, I figured, why not give it a chance? I've been in restaurants in every position of the front of house. So figured this was a good chance to still have that people facing role, learn about the distillation process more in depth, and see where it took me. And I've been growing with Woodinville for almost 7 years now.
Well, and what drew you to Woodinville? Because obviously, it's one thing to say, "Hey, let's go get a job in this industry," but to work with a brand that is, making and distilling everything in Washington, where you were at. I mean, yes, convenience, I'm sure, was one thing, but what drew you to Woodinville in the end?
Yeah, definitely. So I was one of those, more snobby people at first that said, only good bourbon's made in Kentucky. I knew that you could make it outside. I'd had whiskeys in Virginia and all that, but I was like, the best bourbon's coming from Kentucky, just being born and raised there. Then I tried the 5-year-old Woodinville bourbon, and I was blown away. And my favorite part of the story is that Brett and Orland made everything from the beginning. So there is a true grain to glass, handcrafted. They've been able to control every portion. And I think that if it was source whiskey I tried first, I probably wouldn't have loved it as much as I do now.
Well, you mentioned that, and you worked in the tasting room. I believe you then moved up to brand ambassador. Can you talk a little bit about like what a brand ambassador does, especially for a brand that may not be super well known outside of where they're just producing it in their home base?
Definitely. I would say the brand ambassador is the face of the brand in whatever region that they're in. It was pretty awesome that I got to be the national brand ambassador. So I was touching every state that we currently sold in. And it's really the feet on the street, getting a pulse of the city, where there's opportunities, tasting consumers on it, educating trade members, getting into the liquor stores and the bars, and covering every portion of where Woodinville could fit into. Some of it is business to business opportunities. Maybe you're hosting a corporate tasting for their holiday party, or maybe it's standing at Total Wine for 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon, tasting everybody coming in for their weekend purchases. So it's really a dynamic role. Every day is different. And I would say as long as you love people and whiskey, you can learn the ropes pretty easy.
Well, I was going to say, how for you in that role, and even to your next role, I feel like you, though, have an in-depth knowledge of whiskey. Like, you wanted to make sure you knew the ins and outs of whiskey, not just your product to sell it, but just the whole industry in general. Why was that so important to you?
I think being able to speak on other products as well as your own really makes you seem like an expert in the field. If I went in and, didn't understand the difference between a pot still and a column still, or a wheated mash bourbon or a rye mash bourbon, I don't think you have as much street cred in a way. And so I think if you constantly are tasting many different things, so you're educating your palate, but you're also learning how different distillate taste, the story behind those brands, comparing it to yours. And I would say always in a positive light. Maybe you don't like it, and maybe there's a specific reason. I hate coconut, so when I taste coconut on a bourbon, I'm like, this is a really good bourbon, but it is not for me. Or maybe I'll add some water to get it to a different proof point, so that coconut note goes away. But I would say you have to be positive, and the more educated you are, I think you garner more respect in the industry for sure.
Well, and does it help you too? I mean, obviously, when you're at a Total Wine or wherever, folks are like, well, I only drink this, or I only drink these two. And you can go, well, hey, it's like this, or it's closer to this. I mean, I'm guessing that also has to be a huge help to kind of meet the customer where they're at.
Definitely. And I think it helps too when you're educating bartenders, and, maybe they only have 5 bourbons on the back bar, so they don't even know that much about whiskey. That they say, hey, if someone comes in and they always order this, should I recommend whatever product we have? So I think it's definitely good to know, not just for the consumer, but also for the trade members.
Well, and now you've grown past the national brand ambassador role. You're the development manager, which, what in the world does that mean? It's a role you've held for nearly 2 years. What are you doing there?
I like to just say I develop things for Woodinville. So I manage
Very
all of
broad,
our
very broad.
Yes, very broad. We have all worn a lot of hats for many years. So as we get bigger, we're adding more and more roles, which is awesome. We now have 7 regional brand ambassadors, and I will visit them all across the country. Most of them are in our major markets like LA, Tampa, New York City, Chicago. So we have somebody representing all the time. Currently, there's 8 states that nobody covers, so I've been traveling to those markets as well, still acting like the brand ambassador, but on the back end, definitely developing programming for the year, helping create all of our point of sale, looking at our sales numbers, but definitely not. And since it's a 3-tier system and we have to sell to a distributor, there's only so much that we can really sell. And then I feel like there's probably even more than that.
You just do a little bit of
position.
everything. A little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like that's a great way to really get to know exactly what's going on with your product, and how important is it, but also how difficult is it for brands to enter new markets, especially maybe far from where their home base is, like a Woodinville. Obviously Pacific Northwest, I'm sure it's, everyone probably knows of it because it's the local brand there. But when you get into Kentucky or New York or other places that have a decent whiskey lineage and local scene, how does that work for you all?
Yes, every market is its own animal. Some are kinder than others. And I would say we got acquired by Moët Hennessy in 2017, and following their distribution footprint has been a blessing for us. I think it would have been a lot harder to get into some of these markets and also not have the representation we really need to be successful. So we have followed their distributor partnerships in every state. So making sure we're aligned there, and also coming in with a bang, I feel like is the best way to do it. Having a sales blitz, hosting a trade happy hour and education event. But the problem we ran into was we launched a lot of our markets in the first 2 months of 2020 before everything shut down. So we came in with a bang and then didn't have the follow-up because, we weren't traveling as much. We were filling a lot of roles right at that time. So we had new people learning the new brand, but also in an environment that none of us could have even guessed it would get to.
Well, I mean, how then I'm guessing, do you have to go back again and almost do another launch to some degree once you're finally able to go into the stores and go into the bars and things like that?
Absolutely. I would say we're kind of getting to that point right now of figuring out where we need to be like, let's do another big shebang and have a big party, blow it out, educate the distributor so that they can go on and get more. We've been really successful with sales splits as well. So getting all of the regional ambassadors to come to one city, working multiple days, really making a splash in the market.
Well, and you touched on this too when we were talking about your job of you go to the bartenders, you go to those folks that actually do it day to day in their market and really are a unofficial brand ambassador to some degree. How does that work, and why is that also so important? So you can work with them on just the knowledge of Woodinville, but also maybe what to put it with in cocktails or mixed drinks.
I would say the brand ambassador role is definitely relationship based. So if you can become friends with the top influential bartenders in any community, it's definitely going to bring success for the brand. People are looking up to these individuals, especially, the United States Bartenders Guild typically has really great leadership in every market that they have a chapter. And these are the people who really embrace new brands and love education. So if you can get in with them, it typically, I feel like, is a trickle down to the rest of the market and how you can build on those relationships. But then also the creativity that these bartenders have with cocktails go way beyond anything in my knowledge. I stick to the classics if I'm going to make people a cocktail, an old fashioned, Manhattan. Maybe I'll go crazy with a New York sour. But then when you see the syrups and infusions and, using spirits from all over the world in a cocktail, it's pretty awesome to see that level that they can get to.
Well, and it's also cool to see everyone bring something different to the table. Maybe pun intended. I don't know on that, but because everyone has such a unique background, and I love to see what folks can do, especially if they're able to actually make their own syrups and mixers and things like that, because that's when you really see the creativity. Now, for you, what's it like going to a tasting, and how do those types of things work? Because people think all the time like, oh, it must be easy to go set up and do things. But I'm guessing each state is probably a little different because every state is different,
Mm-hmm.
but with what you're able to actually give out. But how do those work? And Is it always with a brand ambassador, or is it sometimes with your distribution partners?
hmm It's a little bit of everything. Some states don't allow our distribution partners to pour at all, so they can be there to assist and hang out while we pour, or we have an agency pour. Sometimes the third-party agencies are more like the promo models that you'll see. We, as Woodinville, try to have our ambassadors at every store tasting that we possibly can, just because we are the experts on the brand. If somebody comes in and they want to know the mash bill, or they want to know the toast and char level on the barrels, we are there to provide that information. And some states you can bring your own samples in. So sometimes we can, bring a little something special. And then other states you have to buy everything there through the store and leave it all behind. So really working with the local markets to understand the laws to make sure we're crossing all our T's and dotting the I's the correct way. And I would say some are more creative than others. Sometimes, the store owner wants to do a little pairing with it. So maybe if we get some chocolates, or we get another little bite that you can bring out different flavors in the chocolate, and it's a little experience versus just trying the whiskey. And some are more masterclass style, where you have people come in every 30 minutes or so, sit down, more in-depth education. And some it's just, hey, you want to try a little taste? I've done a few dry tastings, which I have to say are not the most fun, because you can talk to your blue in the face, but most people want to try it before they buy it.
I was gonna say from bottle to lips is definitely a good way to actually really get to know something. Now, when you do corporate events and things like that, is that kind of the same thing, or maybe a trade event, very similar? All depends on the states and things like that, or is it a little more flexibility there?
I would say there's a little more flexibility, especially if you are working with a catering partner or special occasion licensing and all that. You can definitely get a little more creative than the store tastings. Typically those are regulated to an ounce or so or less. But if you're doing a corporate event, they might be doing cocktails, and you could do a specialty cocktail pre-batched for them. Or, for sometimes there's full-on pairing dinners that they want to do. So each course is paired with a different bourbon. So that lends you a lot more creativity. But also, if they can try more things and more volume, then it should lead to a memorable experience.
Well, and for you, what's the most fun thing for you to do? Is it just sometimes those fun creative store pairings, where you're like, okay, this liquor store owner kind of gets it, or is it even just something where you get to just have fun at an event that has a lot going on?
Yeah, I would say there's really two ways that you can go about it. I love doing happy hour style tasting. So the bartenders came up with a small menu of specialty cocktails for the night. Maybe there's a flight on there. It's more casual, just maybe sometimes buying drinks for people at the bar, but also if they have questions and they just want to chit chat, it's a great way to learn people's stories and what they like. And I've met awesome people all around the country now doing events like that. And then some of them, like the larger events, Bourbon on the Banks in Frankfort, Kentucky this year, and Whiskey X that we did all over the country, is more trade show style. So we have a booth set up, we'll pour out samples. And sometimes it's more just, give me something to drink, I just want to try something. And, people are just imbibing, not necessarily educating, but it's really neat the people you get to meet and the connections that they draw with the brand.
Well, and is there a favorite spot that you get to visit? Obviously, you're based in Kentucky, sort of. So, being home for those events has got to be fun. But maybe beyond Kentucky that you get to go to.
Yes, I would say most of the markets I love, and I love when I can make it personal too. If I have a friend or family member that lives somewhere and I can stay another day or two, I think that makes it really awesome. But I would say of most beautiful places and well received, and it wasn't an uphill battle the whole time, is Colorado. Being in Denver, but then also going up into the mountain towns it's so beautiful there. And then also people love whiskey because they make a lot of whiskey there too in Colorado. So they just embrace that West Coast whiskey.
Well, I love to hear that. And speaking of your whiskey, I've got two bottles in front of me. I've got the flagship, I guess we can call it, right? The Woodinville 90 proof. And then you guys just released, I believe, a special edition, the is it muscatel wine? Did I even come close to that? Or did I?
Muscatel, yes.
Oh, I thought I
Yes, you
butchered it.
got it
Thought I
perfect.
totally butchered it. So can you talk a little bit about just Woodinville whiskey in general for those that don't know maybe the story of it and just maybe what they will get on a pour?
Absolutely. We were founded in 2010 by two best friends, Brett Carlisle and Orland Sorensen, and they had been best friends through high school and college. After Orland became an airline pilot and Brett was in construction material sales, so clearly not the whiskey business, but they both separately saw that the laws were changing in Washington where you could legally distill for the first time since Prohibition. This was in 2008, so crazy that for almost 80 years those laws stuck around, especially considering wine and beer have been so prevalent out in Washington for many, many years. So they cashed in their 401k, sold their home, started applying for small business loans, finally got all the equipment in and realized they had no idea how to make whiskey. So they started calling around and they got
They forgot one important
number.
detail, right? One
Yeah.
important detail.
Yeah, they were reading these chemistry textbooks and we're like, oh, this is a lot harder than we think it is. So they got in touch with Dave Pickerel, and after some convincing, he came out, spent almost that whole first year with us. We were one of his first big projects after he retired for Makers, and he blind tasted them on different mash bills, and that's how we ended up with our high rye bourbon that you're sipping on. It's 72% corn, 22% rye, 6% malted barley, and all that grain is grown at one family farm in eastern Washington. We actually age our whiskey on their property as well. And so I can get into a little bit more of that in a minute. And we have aged everything now for at least 5 years, full-size barrels. They're coming from the Missouri plant of Independent Stave Company. So we do 18-month seasoned wood with a heavy toast and a heavy char. So it truly has been a labor of love. We sold White Dog and vodka the first couple of years, some micro-barreled whiskey, and then in 2015 was our first 5-year-old release of the bourbon.
That had to be kind of scary for them to really wait. I mean, it's one thing to do what some others do. You know, I think of, Chattanooga and some places that, source it while their other one's aging, so they at least have some things to go on it. Because you can do vodka and some things, but that doesn't exactly always move the needle as far as bringing in a ton of dollars. So that was a bold strategy for them.
Yes, definitely. It worked out well. I mean, we were one of the first distilleries in the state, and having White Dog whiskey when every big producer had White Dog whiskey, we were the local guys, and so people actually wanted to buy it. I'm thankful that we have aged whiskey now. I'm not slinging White Dog whiskey on the street.
Well, it's got to say something if someone's enjoying the White Dog, because that's what it all starts out as. So it must have been enjoyable. And just getting this first pour, I see that rye come through very, very nicely. And when you talk about the grain to glass, like you said, it is truly grain to glass. How were they able to work with the farm there in Quincy and the Omland family farm, I believe? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the Almond family farm. So actually, when we first started, we had a much smaller still. It got about 50 gallons a day off of it, and most of the big grain purveyors in Washington wanted to sell by the truckload to fill silo. So we didn't need that much grain, and the city of Woodinville didn't allow us to have a silo at that time. So they got in touch with Arnie Omlin, and he was willing to sell, and forget the name of it, the Pack Tech, maybe that's what it is. 1-ton bag, so we could measure it out a lot easier. It was in smaller quantities. It wasn't going to go bad before we got through a whole silo. And that is how that started. They actually drove over at 3 o'clock. They left Quincy to get to Woodinville about 5 a.m. just to check and see what these two Western Washington guys were doing with all their grain. And that's when they saw that they were actually distilling, doing something with it. And the partnership has just gotten deeper and deeper year over year.
And you mentioned that it's aged there. How does the climate of Washington, do stuff? Because obviously Kentucky, very predictable cycles, things like that. It's kind of cooler in the winter, warmer in the summer, but the Pacific Northwest is a little different.
Yes, it is drastically different. So Western Washington, where the distillery is, where we mill, mash, ferment, and distill, it's gray and rainy for 9 months out of the year. Never super cold, never super warm, but definitely dreary skies. And it actually rains about the same amount between Kentucky and Western Washington. It's just a tiny drizzle versus, a 1 inch in a rainstorm. And so we ship all that whiskey after it's been distilled over to Quincy. And so we have a barrel and bottling facility there and our rick houses. Initially, we started aging out there because we were running out of space in Woodinville. And then we found this actually a great place to age whiskey. The temperature fluctuation is very similar to Kentucky, cold winters and hot summers. Biggest difference though is humidity. So we actually only have 1-story rick houses that are 6 barrels tall. So similar to Four Roses, much smaller though. They're not as long. And we found that there's not really too much of a temperature fluctuation between the bottom and the top of the rick house when it's only 6 barrels tall. But it's having that temperature fluctuation ages the whiskey much more like Kentucky would, versus in Western Washington, we would probably actually lose proof more like in Scotland just because it is so wet.
It is fascinating how where you are changes everything, but also too, the grains you're getting in the climate there. I'm guessing impacts what you guys are able to get.
Definitely. And I think that it's really awesome to be able, it's a full Washington circle. We go from Eastern Washington, then to Western Washington, back to Eastern Washington. So the only thing we're not getting out there is the barrel.
maybe one day, maybe one day. But, for those that, are looking at this, I mean, I really enjoyed that pour. Granted, I am a fan. I've over the time as I've gotten to try more, I realize rye is more in my wheelhouse. So the high rye is always a better pour for me. But what can folks expect when they taste that first sip of the 5-year-old?
Yes, definitely. Well, side note, we'll have to get you some rye whiskey because our rye is 100% rye. So super unique mash bill there.
I am very intrigued by that.
Bourbon. Yes, well, next time. So our bourbon is probably what I drink the most, but again, Kentucky girl, I think I just love bourbon and that sweeter profile. So a lot of spice does come through on this, but I like to compare it to a bite of creme brulee. It lingers on your palate quite a bit. You're going to get that caramelized sugar that kind of coats the mouth, and then those baking spices come up on the back end, but more cinnamon and clove versus that black pepper rye spice you might be used to.
Now, the special one that you guys did, the pot distilled 100 proof Muscatel wine barrel finish. How did you guys come up with that? And this was a special release, I think, back in September.
Yes, so we did a harvest release, is what we call it. So it's a celebration of when Arnie's harvesting the grains with Essential, and we released a special whiskey. So at first it was the bourbon and the rye coming out in their respective years, but then we've done some finishes. So we did a port barrel finished bourbon whiskey back in 2017 with some local Washington and Oregon producers. It was super popular. So then we tried to find as many dessert wine barrels out on the West Coast as we could and realized it's not as prevalent as you may think it might be. And so we got in touch with a barrel broker in Portugal, and he's been sending us ruby port barrels for years. So he gave us a call back in 2020 and said, hey, I have 10 of these Muscatel pipes, and they look like a barrel that's been stretched out really long and thin. They're a lot larger than a regular whiskey barrel.
I was going to say, did I read 200 gallon? 200 gallon? That's
Yes, 200 gallon. So almost 4 times larger. And we had no idea what Muscatel de Suavitel was. So we got a bottle, tasted it with the bourbon, and figured these might play really well together. And so normally they're just finishing in the barrel for a little bit of time. The Muscatel sat in this barrel for 10 years before we put whiskey into it. So it's very unique and probably something that we'll never be able to get our hands on again.
It's a wild ride on it, because I've had a couple different sips, and I feel like each sip was a little bit different. Yes,
it's a roller coaster for sure. When I first had it, it was straight from the barrel, unfiltered, and it was a little cloudy just from all that wine left behind. And then I had it at 100 proof, and I think it's 5% more alcohol than our regular, so you get a little bit more body. But the Muscatel just it's unexpected, I guess. It's like honey and a candied orange peel, but then a little spicy, and then it mellows out, and then it comes back with a vengeance.
Yeah, I was gonna say that it's definitely, for just being a single barrel finish, a lot more complex than I would have thought. Because, like you said, you get that vengeance at the end. I got that. I was like, oh, okay, that's there. But and is this based off of just the regular 5-year-old, and is this also a 5-year-old?
Yeah, so we took the 5-year-old whiskey and then finished it for almost an additional year. So this is actually closer to the 6-year mark. And so one of the oldest products we've released on the market.
Well, it's very good, and like I said, I like the complexity of it because I feel like if you really love the straight bourbon, this is a nice change of pace and one that you can go, hey, you like this one when you got a friend over, why don't you try this one, and basically have a whole totally different experience.
Yes.
Now, for those that are wanting to get their hands on Woodinville, I know it's in Kentucky because otherwise you probably wouldn't be able to work from Kentucky in your home state. So
Yes.
it's here. Where else is it? Where can folks find it?
Yeah, we are in 23 states and DC across the country. We do have a product locator on our website. Real quick, I can list them off if you want.
Well, if you want to, go for it. If I'm going to put you on the spot, can you name all of them?
I think so. So we've got New York, DC, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, Colorado, Texas, Arizona, California, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska.
So you guys got pretty much a little bit of everywhere, and for the most part, someone can go to a state and probably find it, even if it's not in their state.
Yes, definitely. And I know that some California retailers can ship quite a few places because there are laws. I know that they have shipped to more states than we're in.
I gotta love California, and I think you can get up to like 45 different states from some of their folks now.
Right.
Now you mentioned it, that it's available in all those states. Is it basically just the straight bourbon and the rye that's in most, or just the bourbon? What can folks expect to find on the shelf from Woodinville there?
Yes, we have our bourbon, then our 100% rye whiskey, and then we also have that port cask finished bourbon whiskey, so a little sweeter. And those are the three main products, but we also do a single barrel program. So it's single barrel bourbon mostly. There was about a barrel that went to every state of a single barrel rye this year, and that is a cask strength non-chill filtered version of those whiskeys. So a little pricier, but definitely the purest form of Woodinville you can get out in the market.
I like that, and I've also the more I think about it, how did you guys settle on 100% rye? Because the most that anyone ever hears is that 95.5 that Indiana and some other places produce. A couple in Kentucky that are doing the 95.5 now, but 100, that's a unique take.
Yes, I like to say it's an angry mash bill. It's actually really hard to work with, and high protein grain, so you're not getting as much whiskey out of it for the same amount of volume as you would with the corn and the rye and malted barley for the bourbon. And at first, the almonds weren't even growing rye for us, but we knew we wanted to do a rye bourbon. And so they started growing it for us. And Brett and Orland were tasting different whiskeys, and they were like, you know what, if we're going to do it, let's just do it. And so with Dave Pickerell's help, they figured out how to do a 100% rye mash bill. We have to use non-GMO enzymes for that starch conversion to get into sugars to alcohol. And then we make it about once a year, so it helps Arnie clear out his silo so that he can put new grains in there. So for 3 months out of the year, we make just 100% rye whiskey. We've had a lot of learnings along the way, fermenters overflowing and a 2-story rye mash waterfall and all that. But I think it makes for a unique product and really showcases that Washington grown rye.
I love it. It's an angry mash. I feel like that you guys have some stories to tell from when it's production day on it. And I got to say, Ariel, this is a blast to talk to you. I appreciate you just sharing the knowledge, because it's always interesting to see how brands that aren't from Kentucky come into Kentucky or any state in general and kind of, work on their foothold and try to have a presence. And also it never hurts when you've got a good product like this. And I really enjoyed the pours.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed them, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk. And I know I mentioned earlier that my favorite thing was that we made every drop from the beginning. But there is nothing wrong with source juice. You know, if you have a great story and that's how you get your foot in the door, there is nothing wrong with that. I'm just super proud to represent this grain to glass Washington bourbon in my home state of Kentucky. And it is pretty funny. My family has tried almost everything that we've made, and they still just love the straight bourbon. They said, don't bring the rye over anymore.
Sometimes the classics are the best, and it's a great story. I love their conviction to being willing to take that risk of letting it age a long time, and now to have a 5-year-old product as your baseline product. That's a great start. And Ariel, this was a blast.
Well, cheers. Thank you.
Find more from Hops and Spirits at hopsspirits.com.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.